My name is Rachel Monroe, and on the day I thought would be the happiest of my life, I stood in my ivory gown beside the man I loved, cutting into a three-tier cake, while friends clapped and cameras flashed. It should have been perfect except for the empty row of seats on my left. Every chair meant for my parents, my siblings, my relatives, remained heartbreakingly vacant. Not a single blood relative had shown up. I forced a smile as Jason, my husband, leaned close to whisper how beautiful I looked. Guests laughed, the band played softly, champagne glasses clinked. Outwardly, it was the picture of joy. Inside, it felt like someone had hollowed me out. There, I was a bride surrounded by love from everyone except the very people who had shaped my childhood. It was as though my family had made a collective decision to erase me from one of life's most sacred milestones. The cruel irony was impossible to ignore. Weddings are supposed to unite families, but mine had chosen absence as their statement. Every time I glanced toward those empty seats, I felt as though years of neglect and favoritism had manifested into a physical wound. And the truth is, I had suspected something like this might happen, though I never admitted it out loud. All my life, I had been taught that family loyalty was unshakable, that no matter what, blood was thicker than water. But standing in that banquet hall, I realized that sometimes blood can be thin as mist, evaporating the moment you need it most. The hollowness inside me wasn't just sadness. It was a mixture of disbelief and fury, the kind of fury that grows when you realize someone has betrayed you in ways you can no longer excuse. I held Jason's hand tightly, almost painfully, as though anchoring myself in the only certainty I had left. The applause and cheers around us felt distant, muffled as though I were underwater. What none of my smiling guests could see was the storm raging inside my chest, the desperate need to understand how my own flesh and blood could deliberately choose to leave me alone on a day that was supposed to be about unity, about family, about love. And yet, even in that moment of devastation, I knew this was only the beginning of a story far darker, far more twisted than the empty chairs themselves. Their absence wasn't negligence. It was intentional. A choice. A betrayal stitched together by lies I had yet to uncover. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect you, then stay with me, because what happened next not only shattered me, it forced me to redefine everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and the courage it takes to choose yourself when no one else will. The applause from the cake cutting still echoed in the hall when I felt a vibration against my hip. My phone, tucked carefully into the hidden pocket of my gown, lit up like a siren. One new message from my mother: "We need to talk now." I froze. My pulse quickened as I swiped the screen, only to see the notification bar filled with numbers that made my breath catch 36 missed calls. 36. All within the last hour. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the phone. In that moment, every possibility flashed through my mind. Was there an accident? Was someone hurt? Or was this just another manipulation? Another reminder that even on my wedding day, their drama had the power to overshadow me. Jason noticed the color drain from my face. "What's wrong?" he whispered, his hand steadying mine. I quickly locked the screen and forced a smile. "Nothing. Let's keep going." But inside my stomach churned with dread. I glanced again at the row of empty seats. My parents should have been there, proud and beaming. My sister should have been there holding a bouquet, maybe even laughing at some inside joke only siblings share. Instead, all I had were silent chairs like tombstones, reminders of love that had died long before today. The cruelest part wasn't just their absence. It was the fact that I kept hoping right up until the moment Jason and I said our vows that they might walk through the doors late but repentant, ready to prove me wrong. But the vows ended, the kiss was sealed, and those doors never opened. So why the sudden urgency? Why 36 desperate calls after hours of silence? A part of me wanted to answer immediately, to demand an explanation, to finally hear something that might fill the gaping hole in my chest. Another part of me, the stronger part, knew the truth. Whatever they had to say now couldn't erase what had already been done. They had abandoned me. No text or call would undo the image of those empty rows burned into my memory. The band struck up a lively tune, and our guests clapped in rhythm. Jason pulled me into a dance, his smile warm and certain. I tried to match it, but my mind spun in circles. The voices of my childhood echoed, my mother dismissing my achievements, my father canceling plans to favor my sister Harper. Now, on the one day I needed them most, they had vanished again, leaving me to wonder if I was ever really part of their definition of family. I tightened my grip on Jason's hand. If not for him, I might have crumbled right there in the middle of the dance floor. But his presence reminded me of something essential. Family is not always the people you're born to. Sometimes family is the people who show up. And maybe that's why I need to tell this story, not just to unburden myself, but to remind anyone listening that if you've ever felt betrayed by the people you trusted most, you are not alone. It hurts when strangers fail you, but when it's family, the ones who swore implicitly to never leave your side, that wound cuts deeper than bone. Before I go further, let me ask you this. Have you ever been hurt most deeply by the people who were supposed to protect you? If you know that pain, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if this journey resonates, consider subscribing so we can walk through these scars together. Stories like mine aren't just entertainment, they're survival guides, and maybe you'll find a piece of your own healing here. I slipped my phone back into the pocket of my gown, hiding it as though ignoring it might make the truth easier. Jason twirled me once across the floor, his eyes locked on mine with a devotion so fierce it almost drowned out the ache. Almost. Because no matter how much love surrounded me, part of me still longed for the love that was missing, the love of a family that should have been there, but chose not to be. And as I looked into Jason's eyes, I realized something chilling. This wasn't an accident. Their absence wasn't a scheduling conflict or a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, a choice. What I didn't know then was just how deep that choice went, and the lies that would soon come to light would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. I suppose the hollow feeling at my wedding shouldn't have surprised me. If you really want to understand why my family's absence cut so deep, you need to see where it all began. My childhood looked perfect to outsiders. 2 parents with steady jobs, a suburban home with a white fence, and matching holiday sweaters that made us look like the cover of a family magazine. But beneath that polished surface lay an invisible hierarchy, one that crowned my younger sister Harper, the family's golden child, and cast me as little more than her shadow. Harper was 3 years younger, but you'd think she was born wearing a halo. Blonde curls, dimples that seemed engineered for adoration, and a personality that sparkled like fireworks. Everyone adored her, teachers, neighbors, relatives. My parents practically built their world around her. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the quiet daughter who didn't cause trouble, the one they assumed didn't need praise or attention. What I got instead was invisibility. The favoritism was never subtle. When Harper won a local dance recital, my parents bought a cake, took us to dinner, and toasted her with champagne, like she had just won a Grammy. That same week, I was accepted into an advanced science program, a prestigious opportunity that could have changed the trajectory of my education. My mother barely looked up from sewing sequins onto Harper's ballet costume. "That's nice, honey. Put the letter on the counter so Dad can see it later." That was it. One sentence. No hug, no celebration. I ate leftovers at the kitchen table that night while they gushed about Harper's big future. It wasn't a one-time oversight. It was a pattern repeated so often it started to shape the way I saw myself. If Harper had a performance, every eye in the house sparkled with pride. If I had an award ceremony, there was always an excuse, a scheduling conflict, a flat tire, a sick relative. I began to notice how quickly the scale tipped in her favor no matter what I did. I could climb mountains academically, but Harper's tiniest hill was treated like Everest. I remember once asking my mother timidly why they never made a big deal out of my achievements. She sighed, almost annoyed, and said, "You don't need it the way Harper does. You're strong. She's fragile. We have to encourage her." At 12 years old, I learned a brutal lesson: being strong meant being starved of love. Family gatherings only magnified the dynamic. My aunts and uncles would pinch Harper's cheeks, exclaim over her latest play, and ask her to play violin in the living room while everyone applauded. When it came to me, the most I got was "How's school?" followed by them turning back to Harper before I could even finish my answer. I'd sit in the corner nursing a soda, wondering what it felt like to be seen. Over time, I adapted. I told myself I didn't need their validation, that success was enough on its own. But the truth is, Every ignored milestone left a scar. It's one thing to be overlooked by strangers. It's another to be erased by your own parents. That erasure became the foundation of my identity, quiet, invisible, the one who endured while Harper shone. And here's the bitter irony: I never hated her. I wasn't jealous of her curls or her charm. What hurt wasn't her light, it was my parents' choice to dim mine. I wanted both of us to shine, but apparently there wasn't enough room in their hearts for that. That imbalance followed me everywhere, into school, into friendships, into relationships. I learned to shrink myself to lower expectations because every time I reached out for acknowledgement, my hand closed on air. My sister got the applause. I got silence. My sister got the spotlight. I got the shadows. Looking back now, I see how those shadows stretched all the way to my wedding day. When I scanned the room and saw only empty seats, it was as though every ignored science award, every forgotten graduation, every lonely birthday candle had converged into one brutal truth: I had always been alone in that family. Their absence wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the final act in a lifetime of rehearsed neglect. And yet, as painful as it is to admit, part of me kept hoping that one day, one milestone, one accomplishment would finally be enough for them to show up, not out of obligation, but out of love. That hope is what broke me. Because when you keep chasing something that never comes, you don't just lose the prize, you lose yourself in the process. By the time I hit my teenage years, the imbalance between Harper and me wasn't just a pattern, it was practically a law in our house. Every accomplishment I achieved was weighed on one side of the scale, and somehow always came up lighter than Harper's smallest victories. I still remember the day I got the acceptance letter into the state's prestigious Science and Engineering Academy, a program that admitted less than 10% of applicants. I burst into the kitchen holding that envelope like it was a golden ticket. My heart was racing, my cheeks hurt from smiling so hard. I thought, this is it. This is the moment they'll finally see me. My mother was at the table, fastening rhinestones to Harper's dance costume. She didn't even glance up when I said, "Mom, I got in." Her response was flat, perfunctory. "That's nice, honey. Put the letter on the counter so Dad can see it later." That night, Dad didn't mention it either. But when Harper placed third in a local ballet competition, they dressed up, took us out to an expensive restaurant, ordered champagne, and toasted our little star. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate. The acceptance letter crumpled in my purse. The message was clear. My milestones were footnotes, hers were headlines. It happened again and again. When I won a regional math championship, they were too busy to come watch. When Harper played a minor role in a community play, the entire extended family turned out, flowers and hand cameras flashing. At every turn, my hard work and discipline were invisible compared to her effortless charm. One memory still burns in my mind: high school graduation, the day every kid waits for. I had worked myself raw, graduating top of my class. I reserved seats for my parents, for Harper, even for my grandparents. But that morning, my mother called. "Harper has a recital. It's very important for her future. You understand, right?" I understood, but that didn't make it hurt less. As I walked across the stage to accept my diploma, I scanned the audience. Rows of families waved and cheered for their children. My reserved seats sat empty. The applause felt hollow, almost mocking. That night, Harper came home with flowers and hugs from my parents while I quietly packed away my cap and gown. That was the day I stopped expecting them to show up. When you learn again and again that your victories don't matter, you eventually stop announcing them. By college, I barely called home. I built my own world where friends celebrated my achievements and professors recognized my talent. Yet deep inside, a childlike part of me still ached for what I never got: my parents' genuine pride. What's insidious about neglect isn't the silence, it's the way it warps you from within. I began to doubt whether my accomplishments even counted. Was I really smart, or was it meaningless because they never cheered? Every award felt smaller when there was no one to frame it on the living room wall, no one to beam with pride at the banquet. Meanwhile, Harper seemed to glide through life, buoyed by endless applause. Her mediocrity was treated as brilliance, her ordinary days painted as extraordinary. It wasn't her fault entirely, she was playing the role they handed her, but that didn't lessen the sting. I wasn't competing with my sister. I was competing with my parents' blindness. And blindness always wins because it refuses to see. Years later, when I stood at the altar staring at those empty wedding seats, the memories came rushing back. Every science medal, every scholarship, every sleepless night of study that had gone unnoticed. They were all sitting in those chairs, invisible ghosts of a recognition I never received. My wedding wasn't the first time they didn't show up. It was just the most obvious. And here's the truth that haunts me even now when your own parents consistently refuse to witness your worth. It plants a seed of doubt so deep it takes years to rip out. That's what made their absence at my wedding not just painful but devastating. It wasn't a single wound, it was every old scar split open at once. What I didn't know then was that those scars would eventually lead me to redefine what family really means, and that sometimes the people you thought were your anchors are the very ones holding you underwater. College was supposed to be my fresh start. After years of being treated like background noise in my own home, I thought independence would finally free me. And in many ways, it did. I was 2 hours away from my hometown, far enough to breathe without the constant reminder that I wasn't the golden child. But independence doesn't erase old wounds, it just gives you space to see them more clearly. I threw myself into my studies, desperate to prove that I was more than the invisible daughter. I chose biomedical engineering, a field notorious for its difficulty, but also one that gave me purpose. Late nights in the lab, weekends filled with problem sets, it was grueling, but for the first time I felt like I was shaping my own destiny. My professors noticed, my friends admired my discipline. Scholarships rolled in. And yet every time I picked up the phone to share good news with my parents, their voices reminded me that nothing had changed. When I was awarded a competitive research grant, the kind that could fund an entire year's worth of groundbreaking work, I called home, my heart racing. My father's response was clipped. "That's good, honey. Did you hear Harper got invited to perform at the city gala? We're so proud of her." I could hear the smile in his voice. I could also hear what wasn't there, pride for me. It wasn't just one call. It was every call. Every award, every milestone, every inch I clawed toward success was met with indifference. Meanwhile, Harper's achievements, often smaller, sometimes non-existent, were celebrated like Nobel Prizes. She dropped out of college after one semester, but when she opened a small dance studio, my parents practically held a parade. They mortgaged part of the house to help her launch. They posted pictures online with captions like, "Our daughter, the entrepreneur." When I published my first research paper, my mother didn't even share the link. That was the turning point. I stopped trying to prove myself to them. I started building a world where validation didn't come from my parents, but from myself and the people who genuinely valued me. My circle of friends became my family. Professors became mentors. I leaned on peers who clapped for me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. But here's the thing, the scars of neglect don't just disappear when you find new people. They linger, they whisper late at night. I'd scroll through pictures of Harper's recitals and family gatherings. I wasn't invited to, wondering why my seat was always missing at the table. Even when I felt accomplished, I also felt abandoned. The realization hit me hardest during graduation. I was set to give the valedictorian speech. It was the culmination of years of effort, of nights when I held myself together with coffee and sheer willpower. I saved 2 front-row seats for my parents, praying they would finally show up. They didn't. They went to Harper's studio showcase instead. I stood at the podium looking out at the audience, and those empty seats glared at me like open wounds. My voice wavered, but I finished the speech. People clapped, my friends cheered, but my heart sank. Once again, the people whose pride mattered most had chosen someone else. That was the moment I knew I had to stop chasing what would never come. But it also forced me to reckon with a bigger question. If your own parents won't recognize your worth, how do you convince yourself that you have any? And maybe that's where you watching this come in. Because I know I'm not the only one who's felt invisible in their own family. I know some of you have had your victories dismissed, your milestones ignored, your worth diminished by the very people meant to lift you up. Tell me in the comments, have you ever achieved something huge only to have your family shrug it off? How did it make you feel? Sometimes we think we're alone in these experiences. But maybe, just maybe, sharing them here is how we remind ourselves and each other that being overlooked doesn't make us less. It just means we need to build our own spotlight. By the time I entered my mid-20s, I thought I'd finally built armor strong enough to withstand my parents' indifference. I told myself, they can't hurt me anymore. I don't need their approval. But wounds you never confront don't heal, they fester. And the truth is, I still craved their acknowledgement. So one Thanksgiving, I decided to test the waters. I had just accepted a prestigious fellowship at a major biomedical institute, an opportunity only a handful of young researchers in the entire country received. It was the kind of news any parent would brag about for years. I thought if anything can pierce through their blindness, it has to be this. I arrived home fellowship letter tucked into my bag, heart hammering with equal parts hope and dread. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon pie. Harper was already there, her voice filling every corner of the kitchen as she described a new dance routine her students were practicing. My mother hung on every word. My father nodded proudly. When there was finally a pause, I cleared my throat. I have something to share, I said, sliding the letter across the table. My mother picked it up, skimmed the first few lines, and set it down like it was a grocery receipt. That's nice, she said absently. Then she turned to Harper. Didn't you say one of your students got invited to audition for a talent show? Tell us more about that. My father didn't even look at the letter. Harper launched back into her story, her words sweeping away my moment like a gust of wind extinguishing a candle. I sat there, invisible heat rising in my chest. I forced a smile and stabbed at the mashed potatoes on my plate, but inside I was screaming. I wanted to shout, "Do you even hear yourselves? Do you realize what you just dismissed?" But I didn't. Years of conditioning held me back. I swallowed my pride the same way I swallowed that dry turkey, silently and with a bitter aftertaste. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of decades pressing down. It wasn't just about the fellowship. It was about every piano recital they skipped, every math medal they ignored, every graduation seat they left empty. This was the pattern, and I finally admitted it. Nothing I did would ever be enough. But here's the paradox. Realizing that truth didn't set me free, it broke me. For weeks afterward, I spiraled. I questioned why I kept putting myself through the same cycle of hope and disappointment. Why did I keep holding out for love that was never coming? And maybe that's a question for you, too. Why do we sometimes cling to people who have proven time and time again that they will not see us? Is it loyalty, fear? Or just the desperate child inside us still waiting for one moment of approval? I want to hear from you. Have you ever confronted your family with good news only to feel brushed aside? Drop your story below. I promise this space is one where you'll actually be heard. Sharing my fellowship news and watching it vanish into thin air was the last time I gave my parents the power to silence me. It didn't happen overnight, but that dinner planted the seed. It was the moment I realized that if I wanted to be valued, I had to stop asking for their permission. The decision to distance myself wasn't dramatic, it was survival. I began spending holidays with friends, mentors, anyone who made me feel seen. Slowly, I built rituals of my own. Friendsgiving dinners, celebratory toasts after each research milestone, even little traditions like baking a pie every time one of us published a paper. These were small acts, but they filled the void my parents left behind. That Thanksgiving wasn't the end of my relationship with them, but it was the beginning of the end. And in hindsight, it was also the start of reclaiming my own story. They say every family has a breaking point. For me, it came one summer evening, not long after that hollow Thanksgiving. Harper had gotten herself into financial trouble again. Her dance studio was failing, weighed down by poor management and mounting debt. My parents, as always, rushed to her side. They drained their savings, borrowed from relatives, even refinanced part of the house for the second time, and still it wasn't enough. That's when the call came. My father's voice was tight, almost rehearsed. "We need your help," he said. "Your sister is drowning. If we all pitch in, she'll make it through this. You're doing well now, you can spare it." The number he mentioned wasn't small. It was nearly everything I had managed to save after years of scrimping in graduate school and working side jobs. That money wasn't just a cushion, it was the foundation of the independent life I had fought so hard to build. I was silent for a long moment. "Dad," I finally said, "I've worked for every dollar I have. You know that. I can't just hand it over." There was a pause, and then his words cut deeper than any rejection ever had. "So you'd rather watch your sister fail?" What kind of family turns their back in a moment like this? It felt like a slap. After decades of invisibility, now my worth was measured by what I could give up for the child they'd always chosen over me. Not once did he ask how I was doing. Not once did he recognize what that money represented. It was assumed, expected, that I would sacrifice myself for Harper. I refused, and the fallout was immediate. My mother called the next day, her voice dripping with disappointment. "We raised you better than this," she said. "Family is about loyalty. You're being selfish." Selfish. That word echoed in my chest like a curse. I wanted to scream back that loyalty is a two-way street, that family is supposed to support you too, not just drain you dry. But instead, I hung up the phone trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. For weeks, the guilt gnawed at me. I replayed their words over and over, wondering if maybe they were right. Was I cruel for protecting myself? Was I heartless for not saving Harper? But deep down, another voice, the one I had silenced for years, was growing louder. It whispered, "You don't owe them your future. You don't have to bleed just to be seen." That summer marked the true fracture. I stopped visiting home. Calls went unanswered. Messages piled up, alternating between pleas and accusations. I watched from a distance as Harper's studio finally collapsed, my parents sinking deeper into debt as they tried to cushion her fall. And though a part of me felt sorrow for her, another part, the part that had always been neglected, felt something closer to relief. Relief that for once, I hadn't been the one sacrificed. But here's the raw truth: setting that boundary wasn't easy. It left me isolated. It left me questioning everything I'd ever believed about loyalty, duty, and what it meant to be a family. And maybe that's where you come in. Have you ever been forced to choose between your own survival and your family's demands? What did you decide? Comment below. I want to hear your stories, because I know I'm not the only one who's been torn apart by that impossible choice. This was the moment I began to see clearly. Family, I realized, isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, reciprocity, and love. And if those things are missing, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. That night, I looked at my dwindling bank account and my small one-bedroom apartment, and I felt something I hadn't in years control. For once, my life belonged to me, not to their endless demands. It wasn't the end of the story, far from it. But it was the first time I chose myself. And that decision would change everything that followed. I thought things couldn't get worse after refusing to bail Harper out. But I was wrong. What happened next tore away the last illusion that my parents and I could ever repair what was broken. It started with a family gathering. My cousin was graduating from law school, and everyone was invited to a celebratory dinner at a banquet hall just outside town. I debated going, but part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could coexist if I kept my head down. So I went. From the moment I walked in, the air felt heavy. Conversations hushed when I approached. Eyes flicked toward me and then away. I sat down at the long table, the kind draped in white linen with centerpieces of cheap flowers, and tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Halfway through the meal, I realized what was happening. My uncle leaned across the table, his voice raised just enough for others to hear. "So I hear you wouldn't help your sister. Must be nice to watch your family sink while you're busy thinking only of yourself." The words hit like a fist. I froze, fork suspended in midair. My parents didn't correct him. They didn't defend me. My mother looked down at her plate, and my father sipped his drink silent. Harper sat smirking 2 seats away, basking in the sympathy. In that moment, I understood they had made me the villain. My refusal to be drained dry had been twisted into betrayal. And now, in front of relatives, I was on trial. I tried to breathe, but rage surged through me. "Do you even know the whole story?" I asked, my voice trembling but steady enough to cut through the chatter. "Do you know how many years I've been invisible? How much I've done on my own? How much I've already sacrificed?" No one answered. A few cousins shifted uncomfortably. But my father finally looked at me and said the words that broke something inside me forever. "We don't air family business in public. Sit down and stop making a scene." That was it. That was the confirmation I didn't even know I was waiting for. My pain was an inconvenience. My side of the story wasn't worth hearing. So I stood. "If you won't hear me, then you'll hear this," I said, voice sharper now. "I'm done. I'm done begging for scraps of love. I'm done being the sacrifice. If loyalty only goes one way in this family, then I want no part of it." Gasps filled the room. My mother hissed my name like a warning, but I didn't sit back down. I walked out. My hands shook, my chest burned, but my back was straighter than it had ever been. That night alone in my car in the parking lot, I sobbed harder than I had in years. But beneath the grief was something else: relief. For the first time, I had drawn a line so clear it couldn't be erased. And maybe you felt that too, that strange mix of devastation and liberation, when you finally step out of a toxic role your family forced on you. If you've ever reached a breaking point where you said, "Enough, I want to know," share it below. Because your story might give someone else the courage to take their first step. In the days that followed, the fallout spread quickly. My parents stopped calling. My mother sent one message, short and cold. "You embarrassed us." That was it. Not a word about the decades I had spent trying to belong. Not a word about the fellowship, the hard work, the sacrifices. Just shame. But here's what they didn't realize: shame no longer worked on me. That night at the banquet hall, I stopped being their scapegoat. I stopped waiting for them to see me. And though the grief was real, so was the freedom. When the storm finally settled, silence was all that remained. My phone stopped buzzing. My inbox went quiet. The constant tug-of-war with my parents, the guilt-laden calls, the manipulative pleas, they all vanished after that night at the banquet hall. You'd think the silence would bring peace. But at first it felt like drowning. I would wake up to an empty notification screen, and instead of relief, my chest ached. For 30 years, no matter how strained the bond, I had been tethered to them. Now the cord had been cut, and though I knew the cord was strangling me, its absence left me gasping. I spent evenings staring at the ceiling of my apartment, wondering, had I gone too far? Had I severed something that could never be repaired? I'd replay my father's words. "Stop making a scene," and my mother's text, "You embarrassed us," like an endless loop. And yet, beneath the ache, a small ember of clarity glowed. Because for the first time, I wasn't carrying their burden. I wasn't scrambling to prove myself. I wasn't sacrificing my future for Harper's endless mistakes. For once, the only voice in my head was mine. And that voice, though shaky, whispered, "This is what freedom feels like." It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't triumphant, it was raw, lonely, and terrifying, but it was real. In that solitude, I started building routines that belonged only to me. Mornings with coffee and a journal where I spilled out everything I had bottled up for years. Long runs through the park, my breath syncing with the rhythm of my heart, reminding me I was alive, I was strong. Evenings where I cooked meals in silence, tasting flavors I chose, not leftovers of guilt. And slowly I realized something crucial. Family may define your beginning, but it doesn't have to dictate your ending. That truth began to settle in one night when I stumbled into a small community group in my neighborhood. It wasn't anything fancy, just a book club in the basement of a local church. I almost didn't go inside. But something pulled me there. Maybe the need for connection, maybe the hope that strangers could feel kinder than blood. And they were. No one asked me to prove my worth. No one demanded sacrifice, they just listened. For the first time in years, I felt seen without having to bleed for it. It was a seed, small and fragile, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that belonging didn't require erasure. Enough to prove that loyalty could be mutual. Still, the wound of my family's betrayal lingered. And one night, staring at the ceiling again, I asked myself, what would happen if they came back? What would I do if Harper or my parents suddenly knocked on my door, demanding once more that I choose them over myself? That question haunted me, because deep down I knew it wasn't over. Families like mine don't let go easily, and I suspected the next time they appeared it wouldn't be with kindness. But here's where I want to pause and ask you, yes, you watching this, have you ever had that gnawing fear that the very people you broke away from will return, testing your strength all over again? How did you prepare yourself, or did you share below, because your answers might help someone else hold the line? That lingering uncertainty became my new shadow. Every knock at the door, every unknown number flashing across my phone sent a jolt of fear down my spine. But rather than run from it, I started bracing myself. I promised that if they came back, I wouldn't crumble. I wouldn't bend. I wouldn't sacrifice myself again. At least that's what I told myself. Because deep inside, I knew another storm was coming. And this time, it would test me harder than ever before. I should have known the silence wouldn't last. Families like mine don't fade quietly. They regroup, they strategize, and then they strike. It was a Tuesday evening, late fall, when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against my apartment door. My chest tightened instantly. I wasn't expecting anyone, and no one in my new circle ever showed up unannounced. When I opened the door there, they were my parents. My mother with that carefully composed face, equal parts pity and steel, and my father with his hands shoved into his coat pockets, jaw set like stone. Behind them, stepping out of the hallway's shadow, came Harper. I froze. My first instinct was to slam the door, but curiosity rooted me in place. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my pulse thundered. "We just want to talk," my mother said, her tone sweet but brittle. I let them in against my better judgment. Old habits die hard, and part of me still craved their approval, even if I knew better. They sat stiffly at my table, Harper leaning back with that same smirk I'd seen at the banquet hall. It didn't take long for their real agenda to surface. My father cleared his throat. "Your sister has a new opportunity, a business venture, but she needs backing. You're doing well with your fellowship, your savings." I cut him off before he could finish. "Absolutely not." My mother leaned forward, her eyes flashing. "Think carefully. This is family. You can't turn your back on your own blood. Don't embarrass us again." Embarrass. The word stabbed deeper than I expected. That was all I had ever been to them, a reflection in their social mirror. Not a daughter, not a person. Just a source of pride if I obeyed, of shame if I resisted. Harper rolled her eyes. "You think you're better than us now? Just because you've got some fellowship, don't forget where you came from." That was it. The last thread snapped. I stood my chair, scraping against the floor. "No, I haven't forgotten. I've carried every slight, every dismissal, every sacrifice. And I'm done. I won't fund your failures, Harper. I won't play scapegoat for you anymore. And if the only way you can see me is as an embarrassment, then I'd rather be nothing to you." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's lips thinned, and Harper muttered something under her breath I refused to dignify. Then my father said quietly, dangerously, "You'll regret this." They left. No slammed doors, no shouted curses, just the echo of their footsteps down the hall. And for some reason, that quiet departure chilled me more than any screaming match could have. That night, lying awake in the dark, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about family drama anymore. This was about power. They had used me for years, and when I stopped being useful, they branded me the enemy. Now they were escalating, moving from guilt to threats. And I knew deep down that it wasn't the last time I'd see them. But here's where I want to ask you. If someone from your past, someone who drained you dry, suddenly came back demanding more, would you have the strength to shut the door? Or would the old wounds pull you back in, share your answer, because your insight might be the lifeline someone else needs? That night, as I finally drifted to sleep, one thought burned in my mind. The next confrontation wouldn't just test my boundaries, it would test everything I had built since walking away, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. The threats didn't stay words for long. Within 2 weeks, I felt their shadow creeping back into every corner of my life. It started small, strange phone calls at odd hours, numbers I didn't recognize. When I answered once, the line was silent, only the faint sound of someone breathing before they hung up. Then came the emails. Anonymous addresses, but the language was all too familiar. Ungrateful. Selfish. You'll pay for this. My stomach twisted each time. I knew it was them or someone they put up to it. But what really broke the fragile calm was the letter. One evening, tucked beneath my apartment door, I found an envelope with my name scrawled in my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 6 words. Family doesn't forgive. Family collects. I sat there on the floor, the letter clutched in my hand, shaking. For years I had endured their gaslighting, their manipulation, their endless demands. But this was something darker. A shift from guilt to intimidation. From subtle digs to open hostility. I considered going to the police, but what would I say? My family is threatening me with vague notes and phone calls. Without proof, I'd be dismissed as paranoid. So I tightened my defenses instead, changed my phone number, set up new locks, asked my landlord about security cameras. I even started walking home by different routes, my eyes darting over my shoulder in case Harper lurked nearby. It was exhausting, but it also sparked something in me, a fire I hadn't felt before. Because if they were going to escalate, so would I. That resolve was tested at work. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into her office. She looked uncomfortable as she slid a folder across her desk. "This came in the mail," she said. Inside the folder were printed screenshots of old photos, Me at college parties, moments twisted to look incriminating, paired with fabricated captions, irresponsible, reckless, not fit for a fellowship. My throat went dry. It was a smear campaign. My own family trying to destroy my reputation, my livelihood, my independence. And in that moment, I knew they weren't trying to bring me back. They were trying to break me. I looked my supervisor in the eye, and for the first time told someone the truth. About the manipulation, the betrayal, the threats. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. By the end, my supervisor's expression had softened. "We'll handle this," she said firmly. "You focus on your work." Walking out of her office, I felt lighter, not because the problem was solved, but because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Still fear lingered. Because if they could reach my workplace, what was next? My home, my new community. That night, staring at the ceiling again, I promised myself something: I wouldn't let them define me as weak. I wouldn't let them win by silencing me. And yet, as determined as I was, a gnawing dread whispered in the back of my mind. If they've already gone this far, how much further will they go? Here's where I want to pause and ask you, the one listening right now. What would you do if the people who should protect you were the ones trying to ruin you? Would you fight back openly or vanish and start again somewhere new? Leave your thoughts below. I promise someone out there needs to hear your courage. That night, clutching that letter, I realized the next move had to be mine. Because if I waited for theirs, I might not be ready. When you've been cornered long enough, there comes a moment when fear hardens into resolve. That moment came for me on a gray Saturday morning, rain streaking down my apartment windows, when I realized I couldn't keep living like prey. If my family was determined to haunt me, then I needed to stop hiding and start fighting back. I began with documentation. Every note, every email, every strange phone call, I cataloged it all. I kept a journal of dates and times, screenshots of messages, even photos of the letter that had been slid beneath my door. For years I had endured their cruelty in silence, but silence only enabled them. Now I was building a case not just for me, but for truth. But confronting a toxic family isn't as simple as gathering evidence. There's history there, a tangle of emotions and old wounds that make every decision feel like treason. I felt guilty even as I prepared. Guilty for choosing myself over them. Guilty for believing my own eyes after years of being told I exaggerated. That guilt gnawed at me, but I refused to let it dictate my choices anymore. Then came the turning point. I learned from a friend, someone who still moved in the same social circles as Harper, that my sister was bragging. She had been telling people that I was unstable, that I was spiraling, and that it was only a matter of time before I embarrassed myself publicly. Worse, she had hinted at a surprise that would expose me for good. A chill spread through me. Whatever she had planned, it wasn't idle gossip. Harper thrived on spectacle. She wanted a stage, an audience, a dramatic fall for me that she could orchestrate. That's when I decided to step into the light before she could drag me there. I arranged a small gathering with colleagues and a few friends, people I trusted, people who mattered to me. I stood in front of them, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as I spoke. I told them everything. The manipulation, the years of dismissal, the threats, the smear campaign. I laid it all bare. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Not with disbelief, but with support. One of my friends even said, "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. Of course, support didn't erase the danger. If anything, it made Harper more desperate. Days later, another letter arrived. This one slipped into my office mailbox. "You think telling your story will protect you? Just wait. You'll be sorry you opened your mouth." It shook me, but it didn't stop me. Because now I wasn't just fighting to survive, I was fighting for the right to exist on my own terms. And here's where I want to pause and draw you in. Have you ever had to expose the truth before someone else twisted it against you? Was it terrifying or liberating or both? Share your experience, because sometimes your story is the beacon someone else needs to find their courage. Still, even with new strength, I knew a storm was coming. Harper's surprise loomed in the back of my mind like thunder on the horizon. What was she planning? What would she risk to see me fall? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was certain: this wasn't the end of their campaign. It was only the beginning of something much bigger and much darker. That night, staring at my stack of evidence and rereading the latest threat, I whispered to myself, "I'm ready." But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I should have known Harper wouldn't sit quietly while I reclaimed even a shred of control. But nothing could have prepared me for the way she struck back. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening. I had just finished dinner trying to enjoy the smallest bit of peace when my phone lit up with a notification. A colleague had tagged me in a post online. My stomach dropped the moment I saw the words, "Is this you?" I opened the link and the world tilted. There, plastered across a local community forum, was a video. My face, my voice, twisted into something grotesque. It was a carefully edited montage of old clips and stolen recordings spliced together to paint me as a liar, a manipulator, even a criminal. Scenes ripped out of context, me raising my voice during an argument, me holding a drink at a college party, me breaking down in tears after a fight with my parents. All cut and rearranged to tell a story that wasn't mine. The caption was brutal, the truth about who she really is. I could practically hear Harper's laughter behind the screen. She had taken fragments of my life and weaponized them, turning them into ammunition for her performance. The fallout was immediate. Comments flooded and some skeptical, others cruel. My inbox filled with messages ranging from sympathy to suspicion. At work, whispers started. A few colleagues avoided eye contact, unsure of what to believe. I felt stripped bare, violated in a way I couldn't describe. This wasn't just a smear, it was character assassination. But even as panic clawed at my chest, something steadier rose beneath it, defiance. If Harper wanted a spectacle, then fine. I wouldn't cower in the shadows while she pulled the strings. The next morning, I marched into my supervisor's office with the video queued up on my phone. "This is what I've been dealing with," I said, my voice sharp, almost shaking. "This is what my family is doing to me." She watched in silence, then looked at me with something close to fury, not at me, but for me. "We'll protect you," she said. "We'll make sure this doesn't touch your work." Her words steadied me, because in Harper's game, isolation was her greatest weapon, and now I wasn't alone. Still, the damage gnawed at me. Every time I walked down the street, I wondered who had seen the video, who believed it. My phone buzzed with notifications, the thread of comments spiraling. Some defended me, others tore me apart. It was like reliving every wound from childhood, only now magnified on a public stage. But here's where I need to stop and ask you, if someone broadcasted a twisted version of your life for the world to see, how would you respond? Would you fight to clear your name or let silence speak louder? Leave your answer below, because your voice might remind someone they're not powerless. That night, sitting in the glow of my laptop screen, I replayed the video again and again. Every cut, every splice, every cruel caption. At first it felt unbearable, but the longer I watched, the more I noticed something Harper hadn't accounted for: her carelessness. There were inconsistencies, a date that didn't match, a clip that had clearly been altered, and one shot, brief but telling, that proved the footage had been stolen from my private files. Evidence, proof of her hand behind the curtain. And in that realization, a spark ignited. She thought she had cornered me with her performance, but she had left a trail. A trail I could follow. For the first time in weeks, I felt not just fear or defiance, but the faint thrill of possibility. Because maybe this wasn't the end of her campaign. Maybe it was the beginning of her downfall. The moment I spotted those inconsistencies in Harper's video, something shifted inside me. Fear no longer ruled me. Strategy did. For years, she had choreographed my humiliation like a puppet master, but now I finally saw the strings. And once you see the strings, you can cut them. I started quietly. That night, I downloaded every copy of the video I could find. I slowed it down frame by frame, marking every edit, every splice, every place the audio didn't match the movement of my lips. Then I cross-checked the timestamps against my personal files. There it was, irrefutable proof. Clips lifted from private recordings stored on a hard drive, only accessible from my own laptop. Someone had broken in digitally, and Harper was the only one with motive and intimate knowledge of my past. The next step was harder, deciding who to trust. Going public too soon would mean Harper could spin the narrative again, crying victim, claiming I was persecuting her. I needed allies who could validate my story, people who carried weight. So I reached out to my supervisor first, the one who had already stood by me. I laid out the evidence, the stolen files, the mismatched dates, the altered clips. She didn't hesitate. "We'll bring this to legal," she said firmly. "You don't have to fight this battle alone." Still, it wasn't enough for me to survive quietly. Harper had dragged me into the spotlight. The only way out was through it. I decided to flip the script. If she wanted an audience, I'd give her one, but on my terms. 3 days later, I posted a video of my own. It wasn't flashy. No music, no edits, no spectacle. Just me sitting at my kitchen table with the rain tapping softly at the window behind me. My voice shook at first, but I forced myself to keep going. I need you to see the truth, I began. Then I explained. I showed the doctored footage, side by side with the originals. I pointed out the altered timestamps. I revealed how my private files had been accessed. And I ended with a simple, steady line. This isn't about a feud. This is about reclaiming my voice from people who spent years trying to silence it. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in, some from strangers, some from old friends who had once believed Harper's stories. Many admitted they'd doubted me in the past, but could see now what was happening. You're braver than you, no one wrote. For a brief moment, relief washed over me. The tide had turned. But victory came with new risks. Harper's fury was immediate. She unleashed a storm of posts calling me vindictive, accusing me of hacking her. She staged emotional pleas online, painting herself as the sister betrayed. The performance was so polished, I almost believed it myself almost. Here's the thing, toxic people don't just stop when exposed. They escalate. They gamble that their drama will outlast your resolve. And Harper was counting on me to fold under the pressure. But I didn't. I kept showing up. Every lie she posted, I answered with receipts. Every threat I logged. Slowly, the cracks in her story widened, and the audience she craved began to slip from her grasp. And here's where I need to pause and pull you in. What would you have done in my place? Would you have gone public and risked the storm, or stayed silent, hoping it would pass? Drop your thoughts below. Sometimes your answer is the strength someone else needs. The weeks that followed were brutal, but they also crystallized something inside me. I no longer saw myself as her victim. I was no longer the scared child at the dinner table, silenced by her laughter. I was someone who could stand, who could fight, who could claim space in the world without apology. And as I looked at the dwindling engagement on Harper's posts, the dwindling whispers in the community, I realized her reign was ending. But deep down, I also knew this wasn't finished. Harper wasn't the kind to accept defeat quietly. She still had one last card to play, and when she revealed it, it would change everything. I should have known Harper wouldn't surrender, for her attention wasn't just power, it was oxygen. And a person starving for oxygen will claw, scream, and burn everything around them just to keep breathing. It came on a Sunday morning. My phone buzzed relentlessly, a flood of texts and missed calls. When I opened social media, my heart stopped. Harper had posted a live video. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared as if she'd been crying all night. The caption read, "The truth I can't hide anymore." She leaned into the camera, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to do this, but she's forcing me. You all deserve to know she's dangerous. She's unstable. She's hiding things even worse than what I showed you. And I have proof." Then she held up a folder. Inside were photocopies of old therapy notes, deeply private entries I had made during some of my darkest days. My stomach turned to ice. Those were records no one should have had locked away, meant only for me and the counselor who'd helped me survive. She read aloud, twisting every sentence, every vulnerable confession into a weapon. "See," she cried. "She admits she's broken. She admits she can't be trusted." The comments lit up instantly, some horrified, others skeptical. But I knew this was her last gambit. If she couldn't win with lies, she'd weaponize my truth. For a moment, I nearly broke. Watching my most intimate wounds turned into public spectacle made me feel stripped, hollow, raw. But then, something inside me hardened. Because here's the thing, Harper thought exposure was shame. She thought dragging my pain into the light would bury me. What she didn't understand is that I had already lived through it. I had already survived it. So instead of retreating, I went live too. I sat down in front of my camera, tears unapologetically in my eyes, and spoke. Yes, those are my therapy notes. Yes, I've struggled. Yes, I've felt broken. But that doesn't make me dangerous. That makes me human. And if sharing my healing journey is supposed to shame me, then let me be clear, I will not be shamed for surviving. Silence filled the chat at first, then comments started to roll in. Words like, "Brave, thank you for saying this. You're not alone." The tide turned right there. Harper's performance, once gripping, now looked cruel and desperate in contrast. By evening, community leaders and even a local journalist had picked up the story. The narrative had shifted completely. I wasn't the unstable villain Harper had painted me to be. I was someone who had endured abuse, sought help, and stood up against manipulation. And Harper, she was exposed for what she truly was, an aggressor who weaponized vulnerability for control. The fallout was swift. Harper's following dwindled. Invitations to her performances vanished. Employers, neighbors, and even her closest allies distanced themselves. The spotlight she craved turned harsh, unflinching, and she could no longer script her way out. And me. For the first time in years, I felt free. The strings were cut. The stage was mine now, and not because I wanted applause, but because I refused to be silenced any longer. I ended my final live video with these words. To anyone who has ever had their story twisted, their pain, weaponized, your truth cannot be stolen. Don't let shame keep you in the dark. Speak even if your voice shakes. You'll be surprised how many are ready to stand beside you. And before I signed off, I left one last note. If this story spoke to you, if it made you think of battles you've faced, or ones you're still fighting, stay with me. Subscribe, share, and join me in the next chapter. Because there are more stories that need light, and I promise you won't want to miss what comes next. Because the real victory wasn't that Harper lost. The real victory was that I found my voice and used it not just for me, but for anyone still searching for theirs. When the storm finally passed, I found myself sitting alone in the quiet of my backyard. The air smelled of fresh grass, the evening light spilling gold across the fence line. For the first time in years, there was no buzzing phone, no whispered rumors, no looming dread of what Harper might do next. Just silence, peaceful, unbroken silence. Losing my sister to truth was a strange kind of grief. There was no celebration in her downfall, no satisfaction in watching her unravel. She was still family, still someone I once loved fiercely. But I had to accept that love cannot survive when it's chained to manipulation. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go. In that stillness, I thought about how far I had come. The girl who once hid her voice at the dinner table had grown into a woman, unafraid to speak, even when her words shook. The scars of my past hadn't vanished, but they had become part of a map guiding me, reminding me, shaping me into someone stronger. And here's the truth I want you to carry with you. Your story belongs to you. No one, not family, not friends, not strangers on the internet, has the right to weaponize it against you. Shame only thrives in silence. The moment you choose to speak, you reclaim power they can never touch. So as the evening deepened and the stars began to rise, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. I would keep telling my story. Not because I needed validation, but because there are others out there still living in the shadows of someone else's lies. Maybe hearing my journey would give them the courage to step into the light. And if you've been walking through something similar, if you've felt silenced, misunderstood, or shamed, know this, you are not alone. There is strength waiting in your voice, and there are people ready to listen. This isn't just the end of my story. It's an invitation for yours to begin.